What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Breaking the Game show here on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio. I'm your co-host, Stephen Gillespie, and joining me, as he always does, is my good buddy, Austin Carr. Austin, how's it going today, brother?
Oh, I'm doing good, Stephen. I'm excited for the show. I'm happy to be here. This is the best part of my Sunday for sure. So,
well, there you go. Can't beat that. And what else better to talk about than basketball with your friends on a Sunday?
exactly.
And speaking of friends, we're going to be bringing on our Off the Ball Network colleague, Mr. Chris Bolton. He is a sports reporter for WCBI TV, and he's also the host of his own podcast, To Check Up with Chris Bolton. Chris, how you doing today, brother?
Hey, I'm doing great. Doing great. About you guys?
Excited to have
life's
you here,
good, man. Just family's good, wife's good, life's good. Can't complain, brother.
There you go. Can't beat it.
Can't beat it. All right, Chris. Well, before we dive into today's topic that you actually kind of helped, when we brought you on, we asked what you might want to talk about. Came up with an amazing topic. It's kind of in Austin and I's wheelhouse. We love talking about these types of discussions. But before we bring on that topic, we just wanted to give you an opportunity to just kind of share yourself a little bit with the listeners. Where you're from, what you like, how you kind of came to be where you are in life right now, man.
Of course, my name's Chris Bolton. I'm from Mississippi, from Hattiesburg, Mississippi. So if you're a big Brett Favre fan, he's used to play football out there in USM. So that's where Hattiesburg, where USM is in Hattiesburg. But went to Mississippi State. So that's why I have my Maroon Madness shirt on.
Nice.
So Mississippi State.
I'm sorry.
You said you're sorry.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm from Arkansas, so
I was just gonna ask, is that like an Arkansas thing? Like I have no bad feelings about Mississippi State.
Like that. We're SEC West rivals, I guess. But
there you go. I'm not really anybody's rival right now. You know that.
It's about time that Arkansas.
Steven's busy trying to convince everybody that Jared Goff's not any good.
But no, so I'm from Mississippi.
I don't have to do that.
I currently work in Mississippi, in Columbus, Mississippi. So I get to cover Mississippi State, Ole Miss,
nice.
Get to go to those games, Alabama. So I get to, cover SEC competition. Of course, high school football is big here. It's the South. So high school athletic, basketball, football, baseball, all of that. Get to go to all those games. And it's nice seeing a lot of these players in their younger stages before they blossom and become those big-time athletes. So awesome. Starkville, Mississippi, that's where A.J. Brown's from. So he played high school at Starkville. DK Metcalf was in Oxford, which is, about an hour and a half down the highway. So it's and both those guys went to Ole Miss. So it's been awesome just, having a chance to, be covering SEC basketball, football, and just seeing a lot of these guys before they become the big-time players that, we all look up to now.
That's a good point. I like the aspect that you brought up, watching these guys in their developmental stages, in high school, in the collegiate environment. If you could take one aspect of, your job where you cover these guys, not as much on like, say, a national level, but, like we said, building up to that area, what's kind of one thing that you notice about the way that these players conduct themselves at the level that you get to watch them as opposed to when they make it big time?
You just really kind of see just how hungry they are. They put in a lot of work. And I know that work ethic really ratchets up, times 10 when they go pro and it becomes their profession. But you still see, I was able to go to the pro day for Ole Miss when AJ and DK were having their pro day. And you just see how serious they take this. And, This is already a job for them. Before they're even professionals, this is their job. This is their job in high school.
Yeah, right. That's right.
Just think about it. Just think about it if you had one job interview and that was the only job interview you got for your entire field, and that was what determined where your career was going to go. That'd be a pretty stressful situation. That's not like any other job, really.
No, definitely.
That's a great point.
Yeah, it's cool seeing these guys just early on and how much work they put in, and you get to know them a little more personally. You get to see that little side that everybody sees on social media. You get to actually see that in person. The jokes that they can crack, and just kind of how kind-hearted a lot of these guys are.
Definitely.
Excellent stuff. So you've got to witness a lot of people, like I said, before they make it big time. And, in the stages that they're entering, their respective professions, it's a big part of building a team. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today here on our show, is about building a team. What all components go into building a successful NBA team. And, there's people that lament where we currently are in the stage in the NBA life cycle where, players have a lot of what we call player empowerment. That's kind of your key buzzword that you hear in the NBA today, is player empowerment. And people lament the days of old where, a player used to be drafted to his team and he'd die on that team. And, he would, if he didn't win, it was, his fault.
Right.
Exactly. And,
we're
not going to be here on the show. Yeah, there used to be loyalty. We're not going to do a whole lot of bashing people for how they feel about the way teams used to be ran compared to now. What we want to focus on this aspect is, how do you successfully build a competitive NBA team? And Chris, like I said, you see the players before they make it big time. And obviously you cover the game still on a level where you get to observe where they are, as professionals.
Mm-hmm.
Teams do it different ways. We see teams like in Miami where they have what they call heat culture. We see Toronto is kind of building themselves up as a team where, they have great player development. But then we also, on the contrast, see teams like the Los Angeles Lakers where they're just every free agency, they seem to be, big competitors and trying to strive to build championships. Chris, how do you observe the NBA today and the different ways that teams can become competitive?
A lot of it seems like, it depends on maybe the market. Of course, like Oklahoma City Thunder, they're not normally going to attract high-powered free agents. So, of course, the way they might go about building a team is going to differ than what we've seen from the Lakers, the Clippers, or the Brooklyn Nets, or that sort. So, really just understanding who you are as a franchise. Like, where we are, the Indiana Pacers, we're probably not going to be able to sign the most prolific guys, but we're going to have to be A1 with drafting. We're going to have to draft well. We're going to have to make very, cunning trades, try to maybe get some gems before they blossom, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that point, because just the trade we just saw the Pacers make is so typical Pacers. Like Oladipo, he's great. He's kind of the hometown hero, but they flip him for a guy that's 2 years younger, that's got 3 years left on his contract, and when they were pretty sure they weren't probably going to give him a max contract at the end of the season anyway. So that was just a perfect example of what you just said. And we've seen the development of guys like Sabonis, and the coach that they hired was pretty it was a pretty integral part of the team building process in Toronto. So I'm glad you brought that up.
And also just the
Mr. Nate Bjorkgren.
Brogdon was a guy from the Bucks. People knew he was a good player, but when Indiana paid him, they're like, man, they spent up to get Brogdon.
Mm-hmm.
But he's really shown that he's been worth the money and some.
They've made a lot of cunning moves. I mean, they got TJ Warren for cash, and look how good he's been for them.
Exactly.
Yeah, and a
20-point score for cash.
Right.
Yeah, it's remarkable just the different ways that, like you just mentioned, the Indiana Pacers, they bring in a coach that's not a big name. Nate Bjorkgren, I can't think of a more Indiana Pacer sounding head coach name than Nate Bjorkgren. Like, he just sounds like he would coach at Indiana with that name.
Mm-hmm.
Mark Diagonal with the Oklahoma City Thunder. These aren't like sexy names, but they're savvy, smart names. These are guys that have proven themselves at the developmental level and look to try to be like team builders, what we're seeing now. And Chris, I mentioned that you brought up this topic, and I felt like it was a bit prophetic because we came up with this idea about a week and a half ago. And obviously we were just talking about the Indiana Pacers side of this trade, but that 14 deal that sent James Harden from the Houston Rockets to the Brooklyn Nets, the team that he wanted to go to almost essentially from the beginning of the season.
Right.
Chris, how does the way that these four teams got involved in this trade kind of affect the way that you view team building? Was this something that you particularly like the way it was done both on the organizational aspect of it, but also from the players' hand, because they have a large say in where they go in the league now?
No, I really do like this trade. Like it's interesting. We mentioned the Pacers, but this is also an example of the Cavs knowing themselves. They're not going to really bring
Mm-hmm.
in big time free agents. So you know what? Let's bring in a Jared Allen. Let's get a young big who he's as crazy as it sounds. He's only 22. Jared Allen. He's
Right.
been in the league forever, but
Mhm.
he's only 22. So you bring in
Mm-hmm.
Jared Allen, someone who possibly you don't mind paying for at the end of the season, compared to letting Drummond go, because he's going to demand a lot on the market. So someone that can be that young big, a young piece of the franchise, and of course for Brooklyn you get Harden. They're in win now mode already with the older KD. Kyrie's
Mm-hmm.
not a spring chicken anymore either. So you bring in Harden, you have 3 all-star guys. So it makes sense all the way around with all the pieces who were involved in this trade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
I wholeheartedly agree.
Go ahead. I was just going to say,
Okay,
I don't think Brooklyn. I don't. My bad. I'll go. I just don't
No,
think the
please.
Brooklyn Nets signed up for all the headaches that they're getting with Kyrie Irving. If they're not planning on winning a championship right now, so that's a good, good point for sure. Go ahead.
I don't
Steven.
know. I don't know if Kyrie and James Harden didn't know what they were doing before this trade, because with Kyrie Irving missing time, it seems like he affected his trade value in that deal. And then James Harden, I made a joke to to our buddy Artest, who is pretty active on Twitter and things like that. I made a comment to him to where I said, I think James Harden is wearing a bodysuit. And I was kind of jokingly saying that. But if you watch him in that next game, he looked to be in way better shape in such a short amount of time. So I'm curious to see if he actually
those warm-ups are a little misleading. I feel like he always looked good in those warm-ups.
It was just water weight. He just had
there you go.
Shed the water. He's good now. He lost 10 pounds. He's ready to be James Harden again.
I mean, Fat Harden has been dropping 40 for a couple of years, so I don't think he's too worried about it.
I don't think he's been this big, but yeah, I digress.
No, but you know what I mean.
He's been a little big. He's been a big boy.
Oh yeah, barrel chested. I definitely agree with that. But I think that the way he came in this season was a little bit more than what we're used to seeing. But again, I think he was wearing a bodysuit, because if you watched him the other night when he came in and had a tremendous opening game for the Nets, even without a Kyrie Irving, it was remarkable. But Chris, back on the Nets as a team, you now have a team with Kevin Durant, who former MVP. You have James Harden, former MVP. You have Kyrie Irving, former NBA champion. 2 of those 3 guys have been on big threes before. Now, granted, they was on different scales. Kyrie Irving wasn't the third wheel. James Harden has been the third wheel, but that seems like a lifetime ago, where he came off the bench for the Oklahoma City Thunder. And Kevin Durant was Finals MVP a couple times. How do you think, in particular, Steve Young needs to look, or Steve Nash, excuse me, not Steve Young. Well, I can't believe I did that. How do you think Steve Nash needs to look at this team and utilize these big 3 in their roles in order for them to win an NBA championship?
It's what we've seen with these guys. We've seen them both. I think we heard the joke from Chuck talking about the dribble brothers. KD the Splash Brothers to the dribble brothers, and we know what they can do with the ball in their hands. But I think it can work. It can work. We've heard Harden. He doesn't want to always have the ball in his hands. He doesn't mind playing off ball. We know Kevin Durant is the ultimate off ball player. He can spot up, knock down, easy shots. And Kyrie Irving, he has a lot of Kobe in his game. He looked up to Kobe. That was his guy. He has a lot of just, score first tendencies. So Harden is a great playmaker. He's someone now we can maybe make the role for Kyrie. Just worry about getting buckets. Like, you don't even have to try to run the offense, be a point guard. Just be that undersized scoring guard and let Harden do more of the heavy lifting when it comes to organizing the offense. And I think it can work. It's going to be tough. It's going to be difficult because these guys they haven't played with each other. They haven't had to just be off-ball threats. They've been so used to having the ball in their hands. But I think when you have top-tier talents and guys with the basketball IQ and intellect that they have, they will figure out a way. It's tough for 3 great basketball minds not to come together and work.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Austin, how do you feel about the pairing of these big three?
Well, I feel like the more I think about it, there's almost, if they're all getting along and playing well, there's almost no way you can guard this team. Like, you've got James Harden, who we've all know what he can do offensively. You got Kevin Durant, who's a 7-footer that can just shoot over the defense at a ridiculous rate any chance he wants. And then Kyrie Irving has one of the best handles I've ever seen and can break just about anybody down on the dribble. All three of them can get their own bucket at any time against any kind of defense. And at the same time, all three of them don't necessarily have to just do one thing to get their points. Like, we've seen James Harden just do one thing for a long time, but if that was that big of a deal to him and he was so, hell-bent on playing that way, he wouldn't have pushed for this trade to go to this team specifically. He would have stayed where he could just have the ball in his hands all the time. And I think it got old for everybody in Houston. So, I mean, like Chris said, talent kind of trumps a lot of things most of the time in the NBA, but obviously, chemistry is a big part of it too. I think those guys are the real, test is going to be when something doesn't go their way, how everybody reacts. Mm-hmm. But it's not crazy to think that James Harden can spot up once in a while, or catch it on the wing and take a jump shot. He's a really good shooter, and I think Steve Nash's biggest job is going to be keeping all the other guys happy with not getting many shots. Honestly, you have to tell all those other guys figure out a way to make contributions without having the ball in your hands very much, because those three are going to take a lot of shots.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see exactly how much time they all share together as a big three on the floor. You almost wonder if they're going to stagger their minutes in such a way to where you're always going to have two of these guys on the court at all times. And then you got other capable scorer on this team in Joe Harris, who can spot up, who is developed as better as a ball handler and things like that. They still have, DeAndre Jordan, who his minutes may up a little bit without Jared Allen on the floor, but they also have Claxton on the bench. So, and I also found it interesting too, Chris, where people were saying that they have no bench now, but the night of the big trade that they had where they faced the Knicks, they're presumably their bench guys that are going to be coming off the bench combined for like 81 points. What do you make of that?
They had the deepest bench I've ever seen.
We were just talking about how I cover these different players. I mean, I saw Reggie Perry, these last couple years at Mississippi State, and he's a rookie. He's just happy to be on the floor. So he's going to do all the dirty work, try to get all the boards, set all the screens for easy pick and roll dunks. So he's a piece, and he has the NBA body already. So he's one of those guys that slide in from, playing off the bench. That's going to have an immediate impact. And we saw that the other night, that same game, he had double-digit scoring. So
11 points and 5 boards. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's guys that are going to step up and really, just have to show who they are, make a name for themselves. There's pieces on that bench that might not have the cachet yet, but they will when the season's over.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, too, with the three big names they have on their team with them, there's probably not a whole lot of pressure on them. You know what I mean? How much easier does the game get when you've got three of the best players in the world on your side? They can set you up and do a lot of things that a lot of other players can't do. It definitely has to make things easier.
All over again. Like you just need to set a screen and roll to the rim. All right,
yep.
Got you.
It's probably fun.
Yeah, I mean, just so long as those guys are active in Austin, I think that you brought up a good point, making sure that, Harris just isn't just parked in a corner all night long, maybe run a couple sets for him, because these guys are going to draw a lot of attention from a defense, to where when these guys, if their looks are limited, they're going to be great looks for them to be, have efficient, comfortable looks for them throughout the course of the game.
Yeah,
but Chris, go ahead.
I just want to talk about, we talking about, Kyrie, KD, and Harden all playing on the floor together. It does help that these guys are older now in their careers. So, those egos, they might be fine with pushing that ego to the side in the name of winning. Because at the end of the day, that's all they're trying to do at this point in their careers. They've made a name for themselves. They have the accolades, the All-NBA teams, the MVPs, all that. They just want to win now.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I don't feel like, Kevin Durant strikes me as a guy who's too worried about whether or not everyone else thinks he's how good he is. I think he's pretty sure he knows where he stands in the hierarchy of players. James Harden probably too.
That's what he said before.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. This whole entire trade is a kind of a perfect, dichotomy for our show, our topic. It just in the differences in team building just from this trade. It's completely different styles, but they're all trying to get to the same goal. So it's pretty cool.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I found it very prophetic too, Chris. Again, like I sent it to you when we were getting ready for the show. I was like, well, I think that you saw into the future a little bit when you picked that topic because, again, this is the only big three that we have in the NBA right now. And a lot of people said that this is bad for the league. And Chris, I want to get your opinion on this issue. Is that I thought that this was actually good for the league because coming into the season, I think everybody was on the same mindset that the Lakers are looking to repeat this season. Now it looks like there's a team that's probably on their tier if everything is hitting correctly and in a good manner. I think the Lakers now have a formidable team to stand in the way of a repeat championship. Chris, what do you think?
Definitely, I agree. I mean, it seems like the Nets, they're taking the Kansas City Chiefs approach. You can't beat us if you can't outscore us. So,
there you go.
You got 3 scores like that on one team, you're definitely gonna have a chance to win it all. So we'll see how these styles play out because that's definitely it seems like what's going on. The Lakers, they have length, so they'll be able to play defense, and then the Nets, they have scoring. So it'll be fun if they do match up in the finals.
Yeah, no doubt. Austin, what do you think about that aspect of this actually being good for the NBA? Because your Los Angeles Lakers we're looking to repeat, and now the Nets could be in their way.
Well, that's a different topic. I don't want to get too into that because I don't agree with that. But anyway, I think it's great. Honestly, I think it's from a fan's perspective. Back in the 80s and the 90s, if you didn't have a competitive team, it took a while to change up the roster enough to really get competitive. And now it seems like every couple of years, all the big names are kind of moving all over the place, and it's never really feels like, oh my gosh, we're gonna be bad for so long. We have no good future. Player empowerment to me, and the moving around. One, it's fun and exciting, and two, I feel like it gives teams a faster, kind of timeline to kind of change things. So I think it's great. I've never had a problem with super teams. Why wouldn't you all along when I was a kid, I always used to hear about, these selfish players, they take all this money and don't want to, worry about their money over the team. And then they team up and it's like, well, they're cheating the system. They're going the easy way. Like, which is it? What do you want from these guys? I think it's great.
Yeah, I agree. And I wanted to take a moment during the show too, just to review the past champions over the last 10 NBA seasons. And it may sound like a little bit of, just me reading, but I think this would be a good exercise just to see how different, these teams are. So in 2020, the Lakers won it over the Heat, obviously. In 2019, the Raptors beat the injury-riddled Warriors. In 18, the Warriors beat the Cavs. In 17, the Warriors beat the Cavs. In 16, the Cavs beat the Warriors. 15, the Warriors beat the Cavs. In 14, the Spurs beat the Heat. In 13, the Heat beat the Spurs. In 12, the Heat beat the Thunder. In 11, the Mavericks beat the Heat. And then in 10, the Lakers beat the Celtics. So that's basically over the last 10 seasons. It doesn't sound like a long time when you just say 10 seasons, but when you look back to 10 years ago, you had the Lakers and the Celtics in the NBA Finals, almost like harkening back to the 60s and the 80s, right, where these guys were just running amok against lesser competition, to be honest with you, not in terms of talent but number of teams, right? Mm-hmm. So, when I read off that list and I went all the way back 10 seasons, what are some of the differences that you see among these teams that were competing for championships at that time?
I think bigs were really kind of prioritized early on, like in the 2000s and the early 2010s. We saw when the Mavericks and the Heat played, there were still lineups where LeBron was playing the 3 and you had 2 bigs on the floor for the Heat, which was killing them. They couldn't spread that zone and outshoot, really have the shooting they needed to beat the Mavs with that zone they were playing them in. But basketball has evolved now, and a guy like LeBron James, now he's playing the 1 a lot of times. But, over the past decade, we've seen him play a lot of the 4 when it came to, crunch time lineups. He was playing the 4, and you put 3 shooters around him and a big. So, just how lineups are executed now has, kind of caught my attention.
Absolutely. Austin, what do you when you look at these teams, these past champions, what are some differences that you've seen in their approach and team building in order to win an NBA championship?
Well, I think it shows a perfect example of what we've been talking about, and the fact that there's several different ways to get to the same, finish line. Obviously, for the better part of a decade, the Lakers just sat back and kind of relied on their name, the Lakers, their brand, that eventually we're going to get these guys and it's just going to work because we're the Lakers. And for a long time, it really wasn't the case. They tried to kind of go through the draft and rebuild the way a lot of other franchises have done. And it proved to be a lot harder than I think they thought it would be, because, you can't miss on one of those first round draft picks and get back to that level of success. And, then they use the brand name and the fact that they're in LA and they're a marquee franchise, and they get LeBron James and Anthony Davis, and that's how they built their winner. And then the Raptors, other than Kawhi, which they traded for him, but that was a pretty homegrown team. They developed a lot of the talent on that team in-house. And same with the Warriors. Like, nobody knew that Steph Curry and Klay Thompson were going to be the Splash Brothers when they got drafted. They thought they were going to be pretty good players, but Steph Curry almost washed out for having bad ankles. They were worried that he was not going to even, play a full career because his ankles were so bad at one point. So, they've showed that you can do it through the draft if you're not, the Lakers or the Celtics or maybe the Miami Heat. And then the Spurs are just, the Spurs, they just have kind of been that marquee franchise for a long time. And the Miami Heat are another team that was able to kind of just attract superstars. So it kind of goes both ways. And it's also interesting to see how many repeat finalists that there have been. And I just looked it up. Do you guys know how many teams have actually won an NBA title?
Overall in the history of the league?
Like each franchise, like how many different franchises have a title? Do you guys know?
I don't know.
Oh, man. I would guess probably 8.
It's 19, but 10 of them only
19.
have one. So a little more than half the league has ever even won a title, and half of that half has only won once. So there's kind of always been a lot of, repeat finalists. So the idea that player empowerment has ruined all this parity in the NBA to me is kind of just not true, and that kind of shows it. So that was pretty interesting.
That goes back to your point about people talking about super teams and stuff. There's always been super teams. I mean, throughout the history of the league, there's been super teams.
How is Kareem and Magic not a super team?
And James Worthy, don't forget about Mr. Worthy.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's unreal,
right? But whether it was done by the players or done, made by the franchises, that's the difference. People just don't like that it's the players making the super teams now, but the franchises were the ones. You don't want to be in Milwaukee anymore, Kareem? Come on to the Lakers, we got you. I'm saying it was the teams that were making it happen.
Right, and then too, even teams that haven't made the finals that are really small markets, like Oklahoma City or like the Pacers, they have a route to try to turn things around. They just stockpile all these draft picks. And I think, to be honest, the two most important things for most teams in the NBA for a rebuild are your scouting department and the trade market, because we've seen a lot of really big trades recently. And if you can hit on a couple diamonds in the rough in the draft, like, it can completely change your team overnight.
Definitely. Yep.
That's a fair point. And we'll get into that a little bit more here in just a second. I just wanted to touch on some of the common factors that I noticed among the teams over the past 10 seasons that have competed for championships. If you got LeBron James, that's a pretty surefire way to guarantee that you're going to at least make the NBA Finals.
Absolutely.
I mean, just a little bit. I mean, you're looking at 2020, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, and 11. He was in all of those finals over the last 10 seasons, right? Eric Spoelstra, he was there for a good bit of LeBron James's, and even last season, making the finals. Greg Popovich in 14 and 13. If the Golden State Warriors, with the way that Mark Jackson and his regime built that team, and then Steve Kerr kind of inherited it and took it over. And some would argue that he made improvements, but Mark Jackson had that team in the top 5 on offense and defense in the league for a couple seasons in a row. So if you're on that team, you're guaranteed to make the final. And then if you got, a transcendent player like Dirk Nowitzki or Kobe Bryant, you're going to make the finals every once in a while, right? So those were basically the common factors that I noticed amongst those teams. Excuse me. But Austin, you mentioned you need to have draft success and trade success, and really we see it in the NBA now a lot to where if you can draft a couple of players, like that's the key, that's the starting point of developing a contending team. I look at two different franchises and how this worked. You saw how the Nets drafted players with guys like Karis LeVert and bringing in guys who were a little bit unheralded like Harris or Dinwiddie from Detroit and players like that. If you can find these diamonds in the rough, excuse me,
D'Angelo Russell, they brought in
D'Angelo Russell, yeah, trading for him when his value was low out of Los Angeles, right? So if you can establish a good young core, that makes it desirable for stars to come in. But if you look at the way that other teams like Miami, if you look at the way other teams like Toronto, there's a path to where if you get undrafted success and if you can draft guys well and you can stockpile those assets, that makes the trade market a lot easier, right? Because there's teams that don't have a lot of other pieces built around them that want to go to a team like that because of their depth and because of their coaching too, right, Chris? So
yeah,
like Austin said, you got to have draft success and you got to have free agency / trade success. You got to have everything. You can't just be, I'm a team that wants to draft players and be successful, or I want to
just
only
going to build with the draft. It doesn't really work.
Yeah, or I want to just sign free agents. Because even the Lakers, we look at this team now, I think there's only like one guy that was drafted by this team, one or two guys on this team that were drafted by the Lakers. But when they did have a lot of young pieces and assets, that made that Anthony Davis deal achievable, right, Chris?
Exactly. I mean, there's so many ways to go about doing this. I was, just looking at kind of, different teams and how they made it happen. We mentioned the Raptors. Like, basically, you just have to have like a franchise centerpiece. Now, for the Raptors, those two guys, for them, their core was DeRozan and Lowry. I look at their centerpiece being Lowry. He's been a guy that's been there forever. He's been an all-star for them. So when it came time to be able to make a move, acquire somebody else, they to bring in a Kawhi Leonard who was all of a sudden available on the market, they threw DeRozan out there and paired Kawhi with Lowry, that franchise centerpiece. You have Nick Nurse, great coach, and you drafted well with Siakam, and your scouting department was on point too because Van Vliet wasn't drafted; he was an unsigned, free agent. So it's just crazy how you can all the pieces and all the ways you can go about making this happen. Because Toronto is really a special story. They're a combination of drafting well, but also pull in that outside piece that a lot of times happens with like the bigger teams.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. And the way that they added Serge Ibaka in a trade where he was in Orlando, right? And then we saw them execute a trade that took him out of Orlando and kind of build a foundation. Hey, what's going on, brother? Appreciate you tuning in. But they had brought him in, and then they drafted well. You mentioned guys like OG Anunoby on this team too. Yep. Chris Boucher coming out of the development. He's stepping up now with Marc Gasol leaving, and they traded for Marc Gasol too out of Memphis, which a move.
Timeline actually written down. So
okay, let's hear.
Nice.
In 2015, the offseason of 15 going into the 15-16 season, their core players were Lowry, DeRozan, and Valanciunas. That same draft, the 2015 draft, they drafted DeLon Wright and also drafted Norm Powell. So the next season, the 2016 draft, they draft Siakam, sign Van Vliet, trade for Ibaka. They draft Pirtle as well. So they draft Jakob Pirtle. The 17 draft, they draft OG Anunoby. 18, they hire Nick Nurse, trade away DeRozan and Pirtle, bring in Kawhi, Danny Green, and you bring in Marc Gasol, and all of a sudden, you win a title that year. So it took them 3 years. Their rebuild was 3 years from what their core was in 2015, going into the 2015-16 season.
And a key aspect of that trade that I think a lot struggle with, is it worth trading? Yeah, is it worth trading for a disgruntled Kawhi Leonard who made his intentions known, like, I only want to play in Los Angeles, But Masai Ujiri, one of the best minds in the game of basketball right now, said, look, even if he does leave, let's take advantage of this opportunity to where we can get him. We can bring, our franchise's first ever NBA title to this country, to this town. And if he walks, it's still worth it because now we have a title in our trophy case. All of our players have, because once even if the 15th player on your roster is a part of a title team, he's gonna at least get another look on another roster because now he has championship level experience. So, Chris, when you consider the bold move that they made in bringing in a guy that was presumed that he might leave and he ultimately did leave, do you think you also have to be risky in this game in order to be successful?
Unreal.
He mentioned certain franchises, you have to make those cunning moves, and this was a win-win either way. You bring in Kawhi, okay, everything works out, you win the finals. That's what happened. Now, if it doesn't work out, all right, we saw what our ceiling was with Kyle Lowry and DeRozan. It's the Eastern Conference Finals. We're not beating LeBron. So, all right, we'll just rebuild. We'll start over. We'll go, build around our young core and see what we can make, from that point on. It ended up working out, and you win the finals. So, either way, it was a win-win either way because they already reached their ceiling.
Right. I don't know if we'll ever see
it just so
anything like this.
James went out west too.
I don't think we'll ever see a team even come close to repeating the way that Toronto did this. Not only did they do it in 3 years, like you said, they traded for a guy that they basically knew was a rental. They broke up arguably the two most popular players in that franchise's history almost to do it. They had a good enough development system in place to where they said, okay, even if we make this trade and we don't win, the cupboard's not going to be bare if he leaves. We were able to take an undrafted player in Van Vliet and turn him into a star. A guy like Norman Powell used to be kind of an afterthought, and that dude can really play. And they didn't have a single lottery pick. And then on top of that, they fire the coach of the year. And it's okay, we're going to do all these ridiculous things, and we're going to win a title because of it. And I really think that you made a good point. Kyle Lowry is the reason that it worked in Toronto with Kawhi, and it's not working so much in LA with the Clippers, because Kyle Lowry is without a doubt the leader of that team. And it didn't have to be Kawhi. All he had to do was worry about playing. And I think it's showing now that he misses that kind of that leader presence on the Clippers a little bit.
Yeah, someone who can create shots for themselves and others. That's the big difference, I think.
It's just wild if you really look down in the whole timeline to me what they actually did to get that title.
Yeah, and so, Chris, I want to get your opinion real quick on three teams that we had in mind that we wanted to discuss before we move on to our power rankings for this current season. The Brooklyn Nets, they're getting a lot of attention, rightfully so. When you trade for a superstar and you got a big three, now you're going to catch a lot of attention. But the Atlanta Hawks, the New York Knicks, and the Oklahoma City Thunder, these are three teams that I think the more diehard fans of the NBA are kind of understanding what they're trying to attain. The Hawks inherited some of the brain trust from the Golden State Warriors when they started bringing in Trae Young. They drafted, Hunter, Reddish, and they're bringing in free agents now. The New York Knicks, they're finally taking a team building approach to attain success. And then the Oklahoma City Thunder, they're just wanting every draft pick in the world, from here until the end of time, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. I got to have the whole lottery in one season.
Yeah, man. The Thunder, boy, they got some picks. They got too many picks, honestly. I don't think they might end up making a move eventually, 3-4 years down the line from now with all those picks. You never know.
Right. A couple of years, Brooklyn's going to need some draft picks eventually.
Exactly. All right, give us KD back.
There you go.
Let him get his career here.
Just one disgruntled superstar saying, I don't want to be here anymore. And then you have a team like Oklahoma City who has all these picks, or a team like the Atlanta Hawks who they may not have as many picks, but they have a lot of good young talent on that team where they may move in. And one team that I can't help but think would be perfect for a Bradley Beal trade is the Atlanta Hawks. You couple a guy like John Collins, who has kind of ruffling a little bit of feathers down in ATL. You got guys like Cam Reddish, Kevin Herter, Hunter, all these guys that you could package together. Oh, and they have a lot of, salary cap available, if they move a couple of these guys as well.
Mm-hmm.
So if you compare the Atlanta Hawks and Oklahoma City Thunder timeline, is there a one of these teams that you believe is on a more appropriate path to contention?
Oh, it's the Hawks. Looking at some of the teams that we've mentioned, it's definitely the Hawks. I have a timeline written down for them. So, of course, something I noticed, and I'm going to compare it to kind of like how the Warriors and the Thunder went about things. So they did things organically. They drafted their superstar for the Sonics/Thunder. It was Kevin Durant. And from that point on, it took 4 years, 4 off seasons to build a team that made it to the finals. For the Warriors, they drafted Steph Curry, and from that point on, it took 5 off seasons to build a team organically through the draft and some cunning free agent signings like Andre Iguodala, Sean Livingston, Leandro Barbosa, moves like that before they built a team that made it to the finals. The Hawks, they drafted Trae Young in 2018. And we've gone through, two different off seasons. I think they in about 2 to 3 more years, they should be serious contenders in the Eastern Conference.
Mm-hmm.
Like legit, have a chance to win the East, go to the finals, and maybe win the finals if they continue on the path that they have been on when it comes to building this team around Trae Young, because he is their guy. He is the franchise centerpiece, and that's the key to all of this. To all the teams that became, finals contenders, you have to have that centerpiece. Whether it's, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, maybe it's Dwayne Wade for the Heat, who helped. But there's no LeBron James and Chris Bosh coming to Miami if there's no Dwayne Wade. So you have to have that franchise centerpiece, and I think that's what Trae Young is for the Hawks.
Definitely. That's a very fair point. And I think that Austin and we've talked about Atlanta and the path and timeline that they're on. We agree with you. We think that it's going to be soon whenever they, make a serious run at a title. But Chris, we wanted to get your opinion. Austin and we just started this last week. We're going to do our big 3 in each conference for our power rankings and just kind of get your opinion to see if you agree with this or maybe how you would reshuffle the deck if you don't. So in the Eastern Conference, we have the Milwaukee Bucks as the number 1 team. We have the Philadelphia 76ers as the number 2 team and the Boston Celtics as the 3rd team. And the reason why Boston, even though that they have the better winning percentage right now, is because they haven't played as many games, right? And playing games, weighs a little bit more on us than it does maybe some other people. So do you agree with that big 3, or would you kind of reshuffle the deck a little bit?
Well, this is just based off what we've seen from teams, of course, not necessarily projecting forward with Brooklyn, since they just made that deal. But off what we've seen, I would agree. I would probably put Boston 2nd and maybe Philadelphia 3rd for me personally. But I do like those 3 teams that you have listed.
Yeah, excellent. And again, Boston hasn't played as many games. I'm kind of partial to Boston. I love the way that team's constructed. Austin has to hear me talk about Boston all the time.
Hey, I don't mind Boston. I like big men that are really good, like Joel Embiid. I just have always been drawn to talented centers, so I have a little bit of a soft spot for the 76ers. That's all.
They're a dying breed.
The Sixers too is just the reason I would probably put Boston above them is because their second best player, Ben Simmons, who I love, he's not that guy who can who's a scoring threat in the pick and roll in crunch time, and that matters. Philly's success, honestly, to me, is really dependent on Tyrese Maxey.
I was just going to ask what you thought about Tyrese.
Maxey looks like he's been that guy. He's been scoring, getting buckets for them. He's been a good secondary playmaker out of the pick and roll. His development this season is really going to depend, take the Sixers, however far they go in the postseason is Maxey.
Chris, you said pick and roll, right?
Yes.
I didn't think they were allowed to do that in Philadelphia. I heard for years that there was no way they could get 2 stars that can't shoot to play together. But I always thought that would work. I don't know.
Well, if he can't shoot, just keep the ball in his hand and put shooters around him, right, and have him Joel Embiid play off.
Right. Or, like I was just going to say, just give the ball to your giant center that averages almost 30 points a game and see what he can do.
Yeah, who's having the MVP season right now?
He's
that would
motivated for sure.
And you know what else is crazy coming out of Philadelphia? There's no does Joel Embiid care discussions going on in the NBA circles right now. Like his whole being laziness and being passive and stuff like that. I never really bought into that, Chris. I don't know how you accidentally or lackadaisically stumble on to 30 and 12. I don't know how you just accidentally do that.
And there were those same questions about Shaq.
Yeah.
People saying the same things about Shaq early on in his career. But I think a lot of that noise kind of goes away when you hire Doc Rivers. Because they're going there's no way this guy's being lazy and Doc is letting that slide. So,
yeah, his voice is hoarse for a reason. He stays yelling. You know what I mean? So.
Right. And, all the stories that came out about how much of a player coach Brett Brown was and how a lot of guys kind of saw him as a pushover. You're never going to hear that about Doc Rivers. That's a really good point. And I think sometimes with big guys that are just freaks of nature, like the two guys you mentioned, are they're so athletic for their size. Sometimes it just looks easy, and it doesn't mean that they're not playing hard. Like, you can't ever convince me that a guy that gets 30 and 12 in the NBA isn't really trying all that hard. And it's not like a cardinal sin to have interests outside of basketball either.
Right.
Yeah.
No, definitely.
So there's definitely that aspect too. All right, Chris, we'll hop into the Western Conference now. Our big three.
Showing my pacer any love.
Our big three are the Lakers, the Clippers, and the Jazz. And if you rewind back to our last episode, we had the Phoenix Suns in here. They've kind of fallen out of that big three. I don't know if you would still keep them in there over Utah. I could see that kind of being a thought process based off of the talent level on that roster. But if you look at the quality wins the Utah Jazz have, it was really hard for us to leave them off.
Mm-hmm.
No, based off what's going on, what they've done, I would agree. Now, moving forward in the postseason is a different thing. I would put Phoenix ahead of Utah because I kind of feel like Utah is kind of that regular season team, but they do have a healthy Bogdanovich.
Yes,
that will be key in the playoffs. They took the Nuggets to 7 without Bogdanovich. That's 20 points per game they were missing. So who's to say they don't have him, they don't win that series? But I still would kind of lean towards putting Phoenix above Utah for postseason purposes. But I agree right now based on what we've seen from these teams.
Yeah, I definitely agree too. I just feel like a power ranking is kind of more in the moment than overall standings, and with the Jazz winning 4 in a row. But I also do agree that I think long term in a 7-game series, I think the Suns are more dangerous. I just think they have more weapons, but they don't have Rudy Gobert, so I could be wrong.
Well, yeah, and also the Jazz do have Rudy Gobert, Chris, who Austin would argue is probably the best player in the NBA of all time.
Well, he's top 5 at least.
If you look at how important rebounding really is in the NBA, there's a case that Austin could give you right now, Chris, that rebounding is better than scoring.
No, not better, but it's it's extremely undervalued, and scoring is a little overvalued.
Rudy is underpaid. Nah.
Oh,
underpaid.
Well, I don't know. He's probably worth as much as Giannis, being honest. It's ridiculous.
I mean, he gets as many boards as Giannis, so why not pay him as much?
There you go. Because he can't dribble. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to be mean. He can't dribble. But Chris, ultimately, we got the Clippers.
I can dribble, and I don't make $208 million. So it must not be that important.
I don't think you can.
You don't know. You don't know. I got handles, man.
Okay. I'm not trying to get you riled up here on the show, brother. But Chris, we'll get back to this big three real quick. We got the Lakers number 1. I don't think that there's any surprise there. It looks like they're already hitting that midseason form already early on in the season, and it's been impressive how much LeBron and AD actually care about the early part of the season.
LeBron is feeling himself. I mean, my boy's out here. Look, he got the ball in the corner. Not only did he shoot the 3, but he pump faked. Like, he made the shot harder on himself. He pump faked, then shot it, turned around, flexed. Like, LeBron's feeling good. He's feeling good.
If the season ends today, he's MVP. Like, there's no doubt about it.
Did you see that meme that LeBron did this last night, and the next day the NBA created a new super team? James Harden trade.
Shout out to
Yep.
RCD.
And everybody's running to the East now that LeBron James is in the West. That's funny that the narrative had always been, wait, if LeBron James was in the tough Western Conference, he wouldn't be as successful. Now everybody's running out East, so it's funny to see that, right, Chris?
Hey man, that's what happens, bro. When you bring King James to one conference, you got to flock to the other conference.
Yeah. Because he's going to be in the finals, on a yearly basis. So,
but according to all these old stars, everybody eats on LeBron James' watch, though, right? I don't understand where that ever came from. He's been in the finals almost every year.
Well, if you look in the '90s, smaller amount of teams won NBA titles during their time than they do now. So I think that's the argument. But
I get that, but it's just whatever.
Yeah, there we go. All right, and we have a lovely comment. I'm sorry, Chris, I'm going to have to cover your face here. But we just got a comment that says, guys, I tune into quite a few sports podcasts, and you guys are by far the most polished I've seen. You guys bring knowledge, and you can tell you guys have great chemistry, and watching you guys is very refreshing. I'm definitely going to keep tuning in and sharing. If you guys ever want a historical perspective, just let me know. I played against Dr. J and wrote about it. I've also played against Nathan Archibald as well. I have personal stories playing against Pat Ewing, as well as, and it kind of cuts off there, but I just want to thank you so much. Michael, it looks like is your name. I'm sorry if I can't pronounce the rest of it, but Michael, thank you so much. We love comments like that. It truly touches my heart, pulls at my heartstrings, and it means the world. And that's exactly why we do what we do, right, Austin?
Yeah, man, that was awesome. We appreciate that so much. It's like we always talk about how appreciative we are of everybody, but we do mean it. Like I never expected to get something like that, and I think if you want my opinion, I would say he'd be welcome to come on. I want to hear about those stories personally.
Yeah,
I'd like to hear that. So it's pretty interesting. So definitely, thank you for listening, man.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it too is the fact that we had Chris on the show making us look good, because Chris, we've never got a comment like that until you've been on the show, man.
So I'm not very polished, so I don't know.
So Chris, before we let you go, this is about the time of the show where we like to give our honored guests the time just kind of promote themselves and where the people can find you on social media. So could you please indulge us in that?
I got you. So of course, y'all can follow me on Twitter at Chris_Bolton_12. So that's where all my tweets are and everything. We're talking NBA. I'll even throw in some NFL playoff tweets because it's the playoff time. So we're tweeting about everything. But you guys can follow me on there on Twitter and on Instagram at Chris.Bolton_. And you can check out my podcast, Check Up with Chris Bolton. It's on Apple Podcasts, also Spotify, all the major platforms. So there you have it.
All right. Well, and we just want to thank you, Chris, again so much for your time. Love the fact that you're on our team over at Off the Ball Network, where you can go to offtheballnetwork.com to get all of your sports needs. But we're going to, Austin, just again, thank you for everything you do, man. We're going to close here.
You guys having me on, man. It's been fun. We
gotta have Chris. You're who I want to be when I grow up, man. So,
there you go.
Thank you for coming on.
And for anybody who can't see right now, if you're listening on the show, Chris is a good-looking brother, man. I wish that I looked as good and sound as good as he does here on the show, man. He's got it all going on. I'm glad he's on our team. And we just
that's how you feel. What am I going to do?
Without the beard, I'm nothing.
Oh man, I can't grow that at all.
Beards do help, man. Holy cow.
Yes, they're the yoga pants for men. But all right, guys, we're gonna get out of here. We just want to thank you guys so much for tuning in here at the Nothing But Net channel. The Nothing But Net channel. Thank you so much for tuning into our Breaking the Game show. We'll catch up with you guys next time. Much love, everybody.
Have a good one.